3 pilots died when their Beechcraft Baron crashed during a routine flight. And in today's video, I'm going to share with you some of the real-time flight data so that way we can see exactly what maneuvers they were doing that might have led to this crash and their death. I'm Hoover, and welcome to your pilot debrief. This debrief is going to be a little bit different because we don't even have a preliminary NTSB report about what happened. What we do have, though, is the flight data and some of the background that gives us a lot of clues about what took place. And this video that I'm going to share with you is a recreation of the flight using the NTSB data. And we're going to use that to conduct our debrief, and we're going to focus on the facts. And even though those facts might strongly indicate that this was a VMC demo gone wrong, the truth is that we don't know that with 100% certainty. And that's why it's so important to wait for the NTSB to finish their investigation. The only problem with waiting for the NTSB, though, is that it could take 1 to 2 years to learn the results. And in the meantime, people need to know about the things that could kill them, and that's why I'm doing this debrief. Here's what we know about the pilots. There were 3 pilots on board this flight. Sitting in the left seat is Chad Davidson. He's 29 years old and he has a commercial pilot certificate that was issued in 2013 with a rating for single and multi-engine land as well as an instrument rating. He's been identified as a student on this flight, but I don't know what rating that he was working on or the type of training they were doing during the flight other than what the flight data shows us. Sitting in the right seat is his instructor, Bill Hampton. Bill was 68 years old and the chief pilot at the flight school with over 13,600 hours of flight time, and he had an airline transport pilot certificate as well as commercial privileges and a flight instructor certificate. In the back of the aircraft was 53-year-old Rika Ballard. She was the owner of the flight school called Fly Lugu. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly, but Lugu stands for Look Up, Go Up. Rika was a certified flight instructor and instrument flight instructor, also with a commercial certificate. I'm not sure why she was on the flight. Perhaps she was observing Bill's instruction, or maybe there's another reason, but since this mishap took place just a few days ago, all of those details are still coming out. That being said, this is a very tragic event. To lose 3 experienced pilots in one mishap, and my heart goes out to their family and friends, and my hope is that some of the lessons that we can gather from this mishap might help save lives in the future. This is a photo of the aircraft they were flying, and it's a 1974 Beechcraft 95 B-55 Baron. They also had these images of it on the flight school's website, and you can see what the panel looks like and the equipment on board, which the NTSB is going to have access to, and hopefully they'll be able to pull some more data from. I found the safety review on the Beechcraft Baron, and I'm not sure why the spelling is messed up. This is just the way the document looked when I found it online. The data is a little bit old, but between 1982 and 1993, there were 8 stall spin accidents, all as a result of practicing emergency procedures or VMC demos, and CFIs were on board 5 of those aircraft. Now, this data and the crash that we're debriefing just goes to show you that regardless of your experience level, things can still go wrong. Now, since VMC demos are a part of training for multi-engine aircraft, I'm going to talk about them a little bit more later on, going over the steps to doing them and what you can do to be safe. One of the things that a lot of people have been speculating about is the weather at the time of the crash. There was a big snowstorm that had passed through the area that afternoon, and some people are wondering whether icing was a factor. Here's what we know. About 30 minutes before they crashed, the weather at the airfield they departed from was reporting some gusty winds with 10 miles visibility, but overcast skies at 4,900 feet. About 30 minutes after they crashed, the weather was about the same, but now with broken clouds at 4,800 and overcast at 5,500 feet. We can see from the altitude data that they stayed about 3,400 feet MSL for the entire flight until the very end, when they managed to climb to about 4,200 feet, and I'll show you that later, but you can see that the ground elevation varies from about 300 to 1,000 feet along their flight path, and that means they're only about 2,000 to 3,000 feet above the ground as they're doing the maneuvers. Also, it's important to note that although the aircraft is approved for day IFR operations, any ice protection equipment that might be installed on the aircraft hasn't been demonstrated to meet the requirements for flights into known icing. And if we look at the historic radar data for their flight, you can see that at the time they crashed, the big storm that people were talking about is still off to the west, and it won't hit that area until later in the afternoon. Keep in mind that this is radar data, so it's not showing you the cloud coverage in the area that they're flying. But based on those radar returns, I don't think that icing was a factor. However, I do think that weather was a contributing factor to the mishap because they could have decided to postpone the flight until the weather was better, or if they didn't have those low ceilings, then they might have conducted those maneuvers at a higher altitude. Before I show you the flight data, I first want to let you know that this video is not sponsored. I've talked to this company about their software, but they didn't ask me to promote it, and I'm not getting paid to do so. I just want to share it with you though, because it's free to use, and I think it could help save a lot of lives. Now you can see the entire flight on here, looking at the 2D model that many people are familiar with, but it also has the radar data, and you can also look at the 3D model of the flight. You've also got the option for the cockpit view, which is what we're going to focus on for the crash itself. The company is called Flysto, and you can create an account with them for free and upload NTSB data from your flight to generate a model like this, and you can use that to go back and debrief what you did. That being said, we're going to take a look at the end of the flight in a minute and figure out what might have happened. But in order to do that, first we need to talk about VMC demos, because a lot of people still don't understand these or how dangerous they can be if they're not done correctly. VMC is the calibrated airspeed at which, following the sudden critical loss of thrust, it's possible to maintain control of the aircraft. When you're flying a multi-engine aircraft, if you lose an engine, that other engine is going to create yaw. And if you get slower than VMC, it's not going to be possible to counteract that yaw and control the aircraft. The point of the VMC demo is to help you to learn how to recognize and recover from a loss of directional control with the critical engine in op. And if you don't recover immediately, it can result in an unrecoverable VMC roll. One of the things that can make this worse is if you have an aft center of gravity. Now this could be due to having a third person sitting in the back of the plane when you do the demo. Your VMC speed will increase as the CG moves further aft. And the further aft that CG is, the shorter the rudder moment arm is. The shorter the rudder moment arm, the less effective the rudder is going to be to help you to counteract the yaw. And that's why most instructors won't do VMC demos with a third person in the back seat. If we look at the Beechcraft Baron handbook, it says first of all that VMC demos should be done at least 5,000 feet above the ground in clear air only. The highest they ever got on this flight was only 3,700 feet AGL, and that was right before they stalled, doing about 65 knots ground speed. So if they were trying to do a VMC demo, they didn't have enough altitude, but it's possible they were trying something else, maybe like a power-off stall, but we won't know for sure until the NTSB issues their final report. Something else that's really important and worth mentioning is that for some conditions of weight and balance, your stall speed could be above your VMC speed. Now that means if you ignore the stall warning and you keep slowing down trying to find the loss of directional control moment, that's a really bad thing, because now you're stalled and you introduce a yawing moment, and that's all you need to start a spin. The Beechcraft Baron VMC speed based on certain conditions calculated by the manufacturer is 78 knots. Pay attention to the airspeed in the replay in just a second and watch what happens. In order to do the VMC demo, you're going to be in a clean configuration and start above 84 knots. You're going to pull the throttle to idle on the engine that you're simulating has failed, while increasing the throttle on the other engine to max power. Now this last step is the most important though. You're supposed to set your pitch to reduce your airspeed by 1 knot per second until you reach VMC or until you get a stall warning. The reason why 1 knot per second is so important is because VMC can change based on several factors, and you can't determine what your VMC speed is if you slow down too fast. Now don't get me wrong, you should be focusing on directional control and not staring at the airspeed indicator trying to recover simply based on an airspeed. The point I want to make is that the faster that you slow down, the more rapid the rudder input needs to be to counteract the yaw. And if you slow down too fast, you're not going to be able to determine the point that the rudder is no longer effective. Not only that, but if you slow down too fast, then you could easily stall while slowing down below your VMC speed and just go straight into an unrecoverable spin. This is also one of the reasons why a lot of instructors will use their feet to physically block the rudder pedals, so that way the student only has about half rudder authority. If you don't have full rudder authority, you'll lose directional control above your VMC speed, and you should be able to safely recover. Now this technique just gives you a safety margin to allow you to recognize and recover without taking the demo to the limits. And speaking of recovery, that's also one of the things that can get messed up during a VMC demo. According to the Baron handbook, at the first sign of either VMCA or stall warning, immediately initiate recovery. Reduce the power to idle on the operative engine and immediately lower the nose to regain your single engine flying speed. If a spin is inadvertently entered, immediately move the control column full forward, apply full rudder opposite the direction of the spin, and reduce the power on both engines to idle. This should be as simultaneous as possible, and then hold that until the spin stops and neutralize the controls and recover. If you remember back in October of last year, there was a flight in Newberg, Oregon where there were 3 pilots on board a Piper Seminole when the plane spun and crashed into a house. Now that one was very similar to this mishap that we're talking about right now, and I made a video about that with more details that you can check out. But this is something that I didn't share on that video, and it's the flight data from that aircraft. And I want you to watch this first, and then we'll compare it to the Beechcraft Baron crash that we've been talking about. But pay attention to the airspeed because they start off losing 1 knot per second, but then the airspeed is going to rapidly decay and the aircraft is going to enter a spin. The ADSB data doesn't show the spin, but we know the Piper Seminole entered a spin because it was filmed by someone on the ground. But just keep that in mind how the ADSB data might not show the spin as we look at the Beechcraft Baron crash. We'll watch the last segment of their flight and pay attention to how fast the airspeed decays. Keep in mind that this is ground speed and not their indicated airspeed. You can also see their AGL altitude down here at the bottom right, and their vertical speed is on the right side as well. Overall, it's a terrible tragedy and 3 pilots are no longer with us. As I said earlier, we don't know for certain if they were doing a VMC demo, but the data suggests that might have been the case. I can't tell you enough how important it is to understand that maneuver and execute it correctly in order to avoid getting yourself into a stall and spin situation. I highly recommend you check out FlyStow and the tools they have on their site, especially because it's free, because you can use it to easily debrief any flight that you've ever done. If you want to learn more about the Newberg, Oregon crash, then check out this other video about VMC demos that I made here that goes into some more of those details, and I'll see you on the next debrief.